Here we go.
All right. Well, thanks to Chris Norris for booking a great program. It is my privilege to introduce the Reverend Dr. Lori Walke, who is an unbridled enthusiast about the high calling of local church ministry and what the beloved community can do to make life on earth as it is in heaven for all our neighbors. She's currently the senior minister at Mayflower Congregational United Church of Christ. She has 4 degrees, 2 of them from OSU. She's a lawyer. She is a minister. She is working on a 5th degree in ASL, American Sign Language. So she loves studying, apparently. Good for her. But we're delighted she's here today. She's often described as a velvet hammer. And if you pay attention to the news in Oklahoma City, she shows up in the paper from time to time. She's married to Colin Walke, who is a former state representative, served with Trish in the House. And my phone moved. Oh, and she's also prone to get into all kinds of trouble. So anyway, here she is. Welcome.
Thank you, friends. It is so good to be here, and I'm so grateful to Chris for the invitation. Indeed, when people read my resume, the most common response is, well, that sounds like an excessive amount of education. But my parents made sure that my 3 sisters and I were certain about 2 things growing up. One is that we would be in church every single time the doors were open. And the second was that we would go to college because they believed that was one of the most important ways that you could go after your dreams. And obviously, I took both of those directives very seriously. My dad is a retired compressor mechanic who has a high school diploma. He taught me a jump shot right before it was common to do that with girls, good enough to get a scholarship at Oklahoma State University and play for 4 years. And he also read to us at night. My mom is a former public school teacher who retired from the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture not very long ago. She went back to college after having 4 kids and wanted us to be well-rounded. So in high school, she made me leave basketball practice early once a week to go to piano lessons. And she did not care how many extra down and backs I had to run because of that. We were Sunday morning church, Sunday night church, and Wednesday night church, and weekly door-to-door, invite your neighbor to church kind of Christians. And that comforts some of you and frightens the rest of you. I do not usually use scripture when I speak away from the pulpit, but today I'm going to ask you to allow me to use a story from my tradition to get us to where we need to go. And if I do this right at the end, you'll accuse me not of preaching, but of meddling. So the text comes from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 1, verses 29 through 33. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. Jesus came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she served them. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or possessed with demons, and the whole city gathered at the door. So don't blink or you'll miss her. Simon Peter's mother-in-law. I would call her by her name, but Mark forgot to write it down. She is mentioned in this story almost in passing, and most of the time her presence does not prompt questions about her, but about her son-in-law, Peter, who is known to us in this passage as Simon, but who is later renamed Peter by Jesus, hence Simon Peter. Simon Peter has a mother-in-law, which means that Peter was married, a married disciple. I mean, was he a good husband? Did he have kids? These are questions that might come up if we really pay attention to the story, but I really want to talk more about the mother-in-law. What kind of mother-in-law did Peter have? Mother-in-laws have reputations, you know. Was she happy when her daughter became engaged to Peter, a good Jewish boy from a good Jewish family? His partner is his older brother Andrew, and they're in the family fishing business. The boys took it over from their father years ago, maybe she said. And maybe she added, Peter oversees the day-to-day operations and Andrew takes care of the accounts. They call their business the A&P. More of you guys know the A&P than Trish. It's like not a lot of millennials in here, but all right. Was she disappointed when Peter left the fishing business? Because that is indeed, of course, what happened. We know the rest of the story. Things move pretty quickly in the Gospel of Mark. In just the first chapter, Jesus shows up at the lake and convinces a ragtag bunch of fishermen to follow him. Peter is one of those men. Jesus and the newly minted disciples go immediately from the Sea of Galilee to Capernaum, where Jesus teaches in the synagogue, as one having authority, not as the scribes. And then he heals the man said to be possessed by demons. And as soon as they leave the synagogue, they go to Peter's house, presumably because they need a place to rest. They enter the house to find that Peter's mother-in-law is in bed with a fever. Her illness is keeping her from her role as chair of the hospitality committee. Mark's description of the healing is rather sparse. No conversation, none of the back and forth so common in other healing stories. He simply presents the problem and then Jesus' response to it. He took her by the hand and lifted her up. No special words, no delay, no waiting in the emergency room. Chris? He took her by the hand and lifted her up. Just as sparse is the description of what happens next. The fever left her, and she immediately began to serve them. In Greek, the verb serve is diakoneo. And generally speaking, when this word is used with a female subject, it is most often translated as serving or waiting table. Tasks often assigned to servants or slaves, or if there were no servants, to women or children in the household. But when the word is used with a male subject, it has been given an entirely different meaning. All of the sudden, it means to act as a deacon in the church. All very prim and proper-like, with seemingly no reference to taking drink orders or washing dishes or cleaning up or wiping down tables. The translation of diakoneo depends almost entirely on the gender of the subject. So the mother-in-law, after being healed, has traditionally been understood to have immediately begun waiting tables. As you might imagine, this is a little hard for a preacher woman to take. I do not want Peter's mother-in-law's fever to break just so she can stand in front of a hot stove, even for Jesus. I do not want to imagine her stripping the bed and running a load of laundry and putting fresh sheets back on, even for Jesus. I do not want her to be restored to health if it is only so that she can tie on her apron and get the house ready for guests, even for Jesus. I want those lazy, good-for-nothing, good old boy disciples to get off their hind ends, turn off the TV, and help a sister out. It sounds like Peter's mother-in-law is simply one more woman, no matter how sick she's been, has to get up and take care of the men who don't have the brains to work a microwave. But it so happens that this story is this preacher woman's favorite kind of story, because the Gospels are very tricky. The Gospels are often understood as if they are unimportant book jackets, holding together the really important stories of how Jesus and the disciples went to Nazareth and the Galilee and then to Jerusalem, and all of the things that happened in between. We treat stories in the Gospels, like the parables, for instance, with special care, studying them and interpreting them over and over, confident that this is where our attention should be. But we treat the Gospels, the books themselves, as rather unimportant, almost as disposable wrapping. But what about the Gospels themselves? Well, if you've taken a Bible as literature course, you might know that the disciples can be read as parables themselves, parables writ large with their own lessons and challenges. And so one of the themes in Mark's gospel is that the disciples never get it. Bless their hearts, never get it. The parable is that the Gospel of Mark, is that the chosen ones do not understand. Those who should get it do not get it. The disciples constantly misunderstand and misinterpret. They are always asking Jesus to interpret himself. They need it spelled out, and then they want to think about it a little more. They are confused and they are dismayed when Jesus tells them that his life will end not with a triumphal entry into Jerusalem, but with crucifixion. From time to time, they dream of power and glory and ask, who will get to sit at Jesus' right hand and left hand? And this is important because in their minds, the kingdom of God will look very much like the kingdom of Caesar. If Caesar had a right-hand man, so will Jesus, and they jockey for the closest position. And their hope was that Jesus would be that mighty warrior king and throw off their oppressors, leading them in a successful rebellion against Rome so that they could be in charge. But Peter's mother-in-law is actually one of the first clues as to what the parable of Mark is teaching us. She is the first woman mentioned in Mark's gospel. Remember that Mark doesn't care about Jesus' birth. There is no Aunt Elizabeth or Mother Mary. It is the mother-in-law who stands first in a long line of women who aid and abet Jesus. These women tell us more about how to be a disciple of Jesus than the actual disciples of Jesus. Because of the way the gospel is written, we naturally separate this mother-in-law from the whole host of women who are central to this parable disguised as a gospel. But when we name them, we begin to see that it is the women who are the real disciples. And the key, the thing to watch for is that word, diakoneo. Time and time again, these women are set apart by that word, diakoneo. First, when Peter's mother-in-law serves. We see it again when Martha serves, creating a place for Jesus to teach Mary while she sits at his feet. And then there is the anonymous woman who washes the feet of Jesus. She is also said to serve him, diakoneo, to serve him. In the 15th chapter of Mark, when the boys are arguing about who would sit at the right and left hand of Jesus in glory, we see the word diakoneo appear again, this time from the mouth of Jesus. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wishes to be first among you must serve all, diakoneo. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, diakoneo. Here, to serve, we all know and understand as a mutual give and take, a self-surrender and mutual acceptance, an exchange of care, tenderness, help, comfort. Diakoneo. We are here to serve one another. If we look at those who have been doing the serving in Mark's gospel, then we see what it really means to wait table, to minister to take care of, to offer food and drink to guests, to take care of the poor and the sick, to attend to anything that meets another's needs, to provide the necessities to sustain life. This kind of behavior is never reported of the male disciples. And perhaps you are thinking that this preacher woman is being a little rough on men, either because men deserve some credit or because equality is threatening. If it is the former, the patriarchal church has spent the last 2,000 years making men feel awesome. It's fine. If it is the latter. Everyone is still safe from the tyranny of equality for women. Data from the United Nations shows that women are underrepresented at all levels of decision-making worldwide, and that achieving gender parity in political life is very far off, so calm down. To bring it a little closer to home, women make up 23%, less than a quarter of membership in Rotary International. I'm not sure what the percentage is for this club. You said it. But the point of this is not about female superiority or male stupidity. It is not to advocate ovaries over broveries. Matriarchy can be just as unhealthy as patriarchy. But in the parable of Mark, the women understand things before the men do because they were the least of these, the underdogs, the ones who knew what it was to not have power. So when someone showed up to bring good news to the poor, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, the women were ready. They did not need to swap one Caesar for another. They understood the difference between the power of the sword and the bond of love. And the good news for everyone is that ultimately women were not the only ones to get it. The Gospels make the disciples out to be thick-headed, but that's because the Gospels are parables. Obviously, there were plenty of men who understood this upside-down kingdom of God that Jesus taught. The disciples have a very specific role in the parable of Mark, but they do not represent all men, only those people who believe in power over peace, or power over principle. You must serve all. Diakoneo, it is the root word for the church's word deacon, and one of the earliest offices of the church. From the very beginning, life in the church centered on service to God and to one another, both the gathered community and those outside of it. And both men and women served as deacons, and they were charged with tending to the spiritual life of the church, which was inextricably linked with service to others. They connected needs with resources. If someone needed clothing or shelter or anything at all, deacons were charged with connecting them with the resources of the congregation so that no one would go without. They connected outside needs to the people who were ready to waitress, to serve. The text tells us that in the evening on the same day that Jesus healed Peter's mother-in-law, the whole city gathered at the door. And of course they did. The whole city gathered at the door, the sick, the poor, and the weary. And why did they do that? Well, they must have had some idea that they would be cared for, ministered to. They had to have some idea that they would be served. The whole city gathered around the door, which makes it sound like this story is really about Rotary. This Rotary, with your purpose to unite a diverse group of community membership in friendship and fun, to be intentional in your service to others, both locally and globally, committed to initiating and supporting impactful activities and projects by leveraging people and resources to make peaceful, positive, lasting changes in the world and in yourselves. And this is the question we are left with then. Is that what we're doing here? Do people know that they can knock on Rotary's door and get what they need? Will they be ministered to, served, tended to, included? When people forget their humanity at the school board meeting, does anyone ask the Rotary to come and do a lesson on civility and how to agree to disagree, to model problem solving? When our schools need tutors and mentors and parking lot management, do they knock on Rotary's door? When the community faces a crisis, is Rotary on the list of first responders? And the whole city gathered around Rotary's door. So, who needs an apron? Thank you.
We got time for questions. Anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? Everybody's just thinking.
I heard some men over here say, I'm afraid to ask any questions.
No, there's nobody going to say anything. It's a male.
Where did you go to divinity school? I missed that.
I graduated from Phillips Theological Seminary with my Master's of Divinity, and then I went to Emory University for my Doctor of Ministry.
Okay, and you're the minister of a Church of Christ?
It's actually United Church of Christ.
Okay.
There are not a bunch of them in Oklahoma, but we have lots of musical instruments.
Well, I would say you would make a good Methodist because we have lots of female ministers. That's all.
There's no question about men having leadership in so many aspects of our society. But coincidentally, I was having a conversation with someone this morning about the teaching profession, certainly a service profession. When I was at elementary school as a student far too many years ago, nearly all of my teachers were men. Fast forward to today, nearly all of the teachers at elementary school are women. Certainly that's true in the Stillwater district, and I think it's probably true throughout the nation. Nearly all elementary school teachers are women. Which raises the question, is there now a lack of male role models for young students? In other words, my question is, do you think it's actually swung too far the other way for female leadership in schools? What's your opinion?
Well, I think it's important to know that this is actually the swing to, there's a process called the feminization of particular professions. Teaching is one of those. As you mentioned, it used to be almost a completely male-dominated field. But a hard truth is that as the profession was devalued and you could pay women less to do it, it became dominated by women. I also think that we have done a wild disservice to boys and men in their raising, in that we do not encourage the values that we say that we hold, like being family-oriented. We're so worried about little boys playing with toys that are for girls that we don't let our boys have a doll and say, practice being a daddy. Or here's a toy kitchen set, play with that, not to become a chef, but so you can practice putting literal food on the table for your family. And that has, I think, pushed men out of professions that are seen as requiring a woman's touch, because all women are supposed to be nurturing and child-oriented, when in fact that's just a human trait, but we don't encourage it in our young boys. So if we could, for the love of men, start treating our little boys like human beings and not robots, I think that it would solve, frankly, most of our problems.
But I would say the problem is...
Hang on just a second. We'll get you a fine.
Mic check.
Yeah, we'll get you a fine because you
I would say the
didn't have the
problem
mic.
is my mama,
My grandma showed me how to cook, how to take care of the house.
Yeah.
And we don't have mothers that do that now. Now we have dads that, yeah, want to be the big quarterback and all that. But teaching the children right now, well, there's just not enough moms and dads that stick together and do that.
It is, I think, something that all of us have to work on. We are all responsible for shaping our kids. I think that there is no such thing as someone else's child. We are all responsible and we can impact a kid's life in 100 different ways. I don't know a single elementary school or middle school or high school that isn't looking for reading buddies. And it's not really about the reading. It's about an outside adult pouring attention and affirmation into a kiddo and saying, you are valuable enough for me to want to be your reading buddy, your life buddy. And I really encourage y'all to, if you're frustrated with what it seems like a cultural breakdown, is to do everything you can to be part of the restoration of it.
Got one over here.
So you may have noticed at Oklahoma State we have a lot of female leaders these days. It's kind of nice. Our president, the president of the foundation, president of the Alumni Association, our airport director. What can we do to elevate that? Or and I'm sure you do that. What can we do as a community to maybe elevate that? I mean, Women for OSU has been a big driver of that. I think it's fostered development there, but it seems like we're doing pretty well in Stillwater. Do you see that other places as well?
Do I see it other places as well? I think it's hit and miss, but I do think certainly Stillwater, particularly OSU, is really setting a standard. And what you can do to support that is talk them up, and not just talk them up, but show up. Your presence is important. And I think that if you haven't read the book For the Love of Men, it's an actual book title, you should read it, especially if you are actually a man, because I think that men are the key here. The people who are responding most strongly to my talk were women, because they knew, I don't know if I just named some things aloud, that are shared experiences. And perhaps some of that information was new for men are socialized in just very different ways. And it's not bad, it's just, I think, pretty limiting. So I think that men are key as far as saying to other men, hey, I'd like to talk about anything other than what somebody looks like, or that their voice is too high, or that their heels are too high, or their skirt is too short. I'd like to talk when you say, hey, let's talk about basketball, that you immediately assume they're talking about the women's team. I get so confused when people start talking to me about basketball, and I'm like, yeah, the Cowgirls are having a real run. And they're like, I'm sorry, what? Or, man, I can't believe we didn't make the tournament. What? We sure did. We sure did make the tournament. So these are just sort of paradigm shifts that I think, Scott, it's hard to say what can you do better when y'all are really doing the work. And I think that there's a tendency to think, oh, okay, well, we have all these women in all these positions now, but that forgets of all the work that went into it. I think probably decades of work that went into where OSU is now, and I would just say, hold the line. Hold the line.
I'm Chris Norris.
I'm so glad you can make it, Chris.
Me too. I really tried. I could not believe the way this thing turned down at the doctor's office. Anyway, I watched you as a ball player, and that's how I got to know you. I knew you from the store. You played with a pretty good edge, and what flipped? Because your passion now, I think, was the passion then. It was just a little sharper with your elbows and things like that. And well, I know. I mean, I'm trying to go into this because did you have a moment that kind of changed? Because you went to law school, then divinity. What changed?
Hindsight is always 20/20.
Gotcha.
But I was raised in a tradition that doesn't ordain women, and I was raised by a very, very faithful church community who I am so grateful for. They taught me to hold the Bible sacred. I am a Bible trivia princess because of those people. Do not come at me. I can out-Bible you. And I frankly still identify internally as a Baptist, but when you say what changed, I think nothing. When you, again, hindsight is 20/20, and you can look back and connect all the dots pretty easy, but I always had a call. I was just not empowered to answer it. And those things came actually in part because of my experiences here at Stillwater. From my teammates who were very, very different from the people I was raised around, but who really liked Jesus, and they had the same struggles that I did. I also, I was one of those very rare exceptions of kids who did not stop going to church when they went to college. I was actually had dual membership at University Heights Baptist Church and Blue Lake Southern Baptist Church, where I was raised in Norman, Oklahoma. And was really grateful for both of those communities. But University Heights ordained female deacons. Dun, dun, dun. And that was shocking to me. And I went home with my bulletin and I said, Mom, there are women who are deacons at University Heights. Is this okay? And she gave what I think now is the most Baptist woman response, which is yes. At least they're getting credit for doing the work that they always do. And so that started me asking some questions and about some of that theology that I had been raised on. And fast forward, I met my husband the first year of law school. He's also an Oklahoma State grad. And he went to the church. He was a member of the church where I now am the senior minister. And so things escalated. There's a way to finish that off. Things escalated.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And